Coming up on this episode of the Mario Rosenstock Podcast.
And very good, because I understand that in a sense you are also the special one. You have been given outstanding contribution to cancer medicine and research award.
It's true.
It's like Premier League.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I guess that does make me a special one. my late mother, Lord Ruster, still thought I was a failure though, because I wasn't a priest. You know, no amount of awards would have made up for that one, I'm afraid.
So one of the first things that Professor John Crown said to me when he arrived at the studio was that he has always wanted to be interviewed by Jose Mourinho. So who was I to refuse Ireland's most celebrated cancer specialist? You might be familiar with John from his regular appearances in the media over the years. He's always a passionate, eloquent and expert voice on the Irish health system and excellence in cancer care, and generally quite critical of the way our health system operates. In our chat, we talk about where it has gone wrong and how John believes it can be fixed. But I also learn about his own fascinating background, and it is what inspired him to become a cancer specialist, what we all need to do or stop doing to live longer, healthier lives, and lots more.
You know something, I knew I wanted to be a cancer specialist nearly as soon as I knew I wanted to be a doctor. I was picking Leaving Cert subjects really at the age of 14 in preparation for medicine, and I never really deviated from it. Oncology was what I wanted to do, and I still find it endlessly fascinating. The number of mutagenic chemicals in a puff of tobacco smoke is vast, so you need to stop it. I used to smoke myself. I know it's not easy.
Did you?
Yeah.
How many?
I was a real smoker.
Yeah, proper smoker. Me too.
I was a proper smoker. So people accuse me of being a nanny state pusher. No. I'm not, but I mean, I hate seeing people's lives being ruined by smoking, and I will be relentless in trying to get people to stop. The way the system is reimbursed incentivizes inefficiency. It doesn't incentivize getting people off waiting lists. Somebody once put it beautifully. Imagine there's a bar, and there's a public bar, and there's a lounge. And in the lounge, the bar staff are paid by the drink they serve. But in the bar, they're paid by the hour. Where will you get your drink faster?
Just recently, John was crowned with the Outstanding Contribution to Cancer Medicine and Research Award from the Irish Association for Cancer Research. This is a very big deal, so I was delighted when John agreed to join me here on the podcast at such a significant time in his life and career. And you'll hear our chat in full in just a couple of minutes, right after this.
You've reached the voicemail of Kevin Backhurst, head of RTE. Please leave a message after the bong. Kevin, Joe Duffy here. Good afternoon to you. 1:44 in the afternoon. I'm just about to go on the radio. 250 grand a year. Salary cap. Kevin, what are you doing? This is penury. I work 6 hours a week. 250 grand. You can't live on that. Man cannot live on bread alone. Me phone, me screen is on fire with people saying, poor Joe. What am I going to do? Kevin, get back to me. Hi, Kevin. Miriam O'Callaghan here. I just heard the news about the pay cuts. I'm just about to go out for a girls' lunch, but I'll call you later, Kevin. Bye.
Hi, Kevin. It's Brendan O'Connor here. Listen, heard the news there. Any chance you'd like to come on the Sunday? I'll ask you a few hard questions, inverted commas. You know yourself. But listen, I'm all aboard when it comes to the cuts, man. Keep them coming. Yeah, I'm loving it, man. Loving it, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm loving it. Bye. Hi, Kevin. It's Miriam O'Callaghan here again. Genuinely? Listen, I have 8 kids to feed. You heartless bastard!
And, of course, there's exclusive comedy every week on the Mario Rosenstock podcast. And if you would like to see me in person, on stage, live, unvetted, unhinged, you can see me at the 3 Arena next year, Friday, 28th of March. Tickets on sale now, tickets flying out the door. But it's going to be my biggest show ever, and I would love to see you there. Okay, let's get to the main event of the day. John Crown. Waiting outside. So as I mentioned at the top of the episode, he arrived at the studio, and after a few seconds of chit-chat, he landed me with a very interesting and unexpected request. So let's pick it up from there.
So, John, when you talk to John Crown, you expect a very, very heavyweight, deep sort of conversation to do with healthcare policy and governments and all this. And the last thing you expect is that John is going to say, "I've always wanted to be interviewed by Jose Mourinho."
Absolutely, and I've a bone to pick with you. I don't think he gave Damien Duff a fair crack at the whip at all. No, I must say, I think he should have been more regularly picked. I know there was always this thing with himself and Ari and Robin, but I think he was a better player than Robin.
They were my two flying wingers. And very good, because I understand that in a sense you are also the special one.
Absolutely.
You have been given outstanding contribution to cancer medicine and research award.
It's true.
It's like Premier League.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I guess that does make me a special one. My late mother, Lord Ruster, still thought I was a failure, though, because I wasn't a priest. No amount of awards would have made up for that one, I'm afraid.
Well, John, you're very welcome to my podcast. And the first thing, because a person who's interested in accents, of course, I want to use your accent to trace your beginnings. So, of course, there's a slight Americana in your accent. Almost Michael Flatley-esque. That was him dancing, not me.
Yeah.
Where does it come from?
I was born in Brooklyn. My parents were Irish immigrants. My dad was from Leitrim. My mother was from Kildare. And they emigrated at different times to New York. And I was born in Brooklyn. I lived there until I was 10. So I was there for the first 10 years of my life. And I was there again for another 8 years of my life, between about the ages of 27 and 35, when I was doing my senior training in cancer medicine. So I've been about a third of my life on that side of the Atlantic. And I still feel very connected to it. And I feel very viscerally Irish American. I mean, we had the whole Irish American experience. We grew up with pictures of JFK all around our house. I can still recall, like yesterday, the day he died, and my disconsolate, distraught mother. We were in school, and the principal came into our class in Catholic, parochial school in Brooklyn, where the Kennedys obviously were a very big item, whispered something in the teacher's ear. The teacher's face went white and said, "You're all going home. The president is very sick." So we were, light-hearted children getting off school early, went home. In those innocent days when a 6-year-old could walk 3 or 4 blocks through Brooklyn on your own and nobody batted an eyelid at the thought that you would walk home. And to find my mother in floods of tears with the television on that JFK had just been killed. It was a very Irish-American upbringing, I must say.
Yeah, that's the kind of world you grew up in. It reminded me, when I was just reading a bit about your biog, of like Mad Men. If you were watching Mad Men, it would have been that world.
I think I'm more Roger than Don Draper, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A little scotch?
I preferred Roger's job. Yeah, it seemed like a really good gig, all right. 12 o'clock, a couple of martinis before they did the afternoon's work. Things are different now.
Yeah, your dad went from he was an immigrant from Ireland, and he went to New York in '47. So what was he coming from in Ireland, and what was he going to?
His family were. They had a farm and a business in North Leitrim in a little place called Lurganboy, which was near Manor Hamilton. The joke used to be there were people in my father's family wanted to see Carrick and Shannon once before they died. It was a very quiet little place. My dad's, they had modest prosperity. They had a shop and a farm. And my dad, actually, the full unsanitized version of the story is when my dad went to the States, he was actually an illegal immigrant, which I think is very topical with all the issues we have right now with immigration in Ireland. But my dad's brother, his older brother, who was going to be the one who inherited the farm and the land, he had all the paperwork planned to go to the States. Everything was ready. And my dad, for whatever reason, said, "This isn't fair, Dickie. You should keep the place. I should go. You're the elder brother. This should all be yours. Why don't I just go and I'll take the papers?" So my dad actually went on my uncle's paperwork when he first went to the States. And he was irregularly in the States for quite... Now, he did regularize it in the end. But, I mean, there were times when it was a bit touch and go and he wondered if he actually would be asked to leave the country or not. My dad had a number of jobs. He used to tell the story of arriving off the subway station. He didn't go to Ellis Island. It wasn't that cliched, but he did go in a boat. It was before the days when everybody flew. He went in a boat and a ship and arrived in New York, clutching the address, a little bit of money, and the address of the Irish gentleman from North Leitrim that you contacted when you arrived in New York, who would look after you for the first few days you were there and then get you organised with an apartment and a job. But he used to tell the story of coming up the steps at 42nd Street Station near the Chrysler building to the hustle and bustle of New York, having left Leitrim, where there wasn't then and still isn't a traffic light in the whole county. Yeah. And it was quite a culture shock for him, but he took to it like a duck to water. He did a number of different jobs. He was a taxi driver. He drove a taxi in New York. And he came back on holidays to Ireland to visit his sister, to visit his whole family, but for a while he visited his sister in her flat in Rathmines, and his sister's flatmate was a nurse who worked as a nurse with my aunt, and that was my mother. They struck up a romance, and she then, some months later, followed him to America, and they got married, and that was how the family started. But my dad, when I was very young, when he was driving the taxi, was in a really serious accident where he had a severe spinal injury. Thankfully, he was not left paralysed, but I'm told at the time it was a bit touch and go that he might have been. Got a bit of a settlement from the accident and used it to buy a shop. And he bought a little business on the corner of 4th Avenue and 45th Street in Brooklyn, which was a little gold mine of a place to have a shop because there was a subway station right downstairs. So for the next 10 or 12 years of his life, he worked brutally hard. The shop would be open every morning to catch the 6 o'clock commuters. It was open until 11 o'clock at night. He used to take an hour-long nap in the middle of the afternoon. It was open all day Saturday and it was open on Sunday until 5 o'clock. So it was a hard life, but again, he achieved a modest level of prosperity with that. I was an only child, and
were you doted upon?
Yes, I would have been. They really made an effort not to spoil me, though. I mean, and things like my friends used to always say, "Your dad owns a candy store. You must be," and I wasn't allowed to take anything from the store. I was allowed to take the comics and read them and put them back. And funnily enough, with my anti-smoking credentials now, it's funny to think of the name of the shop. My dad's shop is called Jack's Cigar Store. Yeah, but anyway, that was my dad. He was lovely.
And your mum was working as a nurse?
My mum worked as a nurse. She didn't work then for the years when I was young, and then we came back to Ireland in installments, sort of in the late 1960s. My mother did go back to nursing, and in fact, my mother ultimately nursed on both sides of the Atlantic in a number of hospitals, both in general nursing, which she was trained in, and subsequently in psychiatry nursing, which she went back and did extra training in. So she had worked as a nurse in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 1990s. She was well into her 70s when she finally retired from nursing. She loved it. Her proudest possession was her Meath Hospital nurse's pin, the badge that they got when they graduated from nursing school.
So it was very much a vocational thing.
She was. She really loved it, I must say. And it's not a coincidence that I got to like medicine or the idea of doing medicine at an early age. She was a big influence on me in that regard. I really knew I wanted to do medicine from really seriously about the age of 13 or 14. I didn't deflect much from it.
Yeah.
When I got over the early stage of wanting to be an admiral in the Navy and a train driver and all that stuff.
Or Roger in Mad Men.
That was in my 50s.
Yeah. Do you think that's changed, by the way? The idea that somebody can really, really want to be a doctor, as opposed to people now just picking to be a doctor based on the idea that it's going to be a safe job. Do you think more people used to really want to be?
Well, it's hugely oversubscribed. I mean, the number of people who want to get into medical school, both in Ireland and worldwide, compared to the number of places, is in most countries it's between 10 to 1 and 100 to 1. There's just huge competition for places in medical school. So people do find it attractive. Now, I'm sure the fact that in most places doctors are well off is not irrelevant to that discussion as well. Interestingly, what I'm hearing people saying now is that whereas the smartest kids in the class, in the Leaving Cert class, a huge number would say medicine or law for their two choices. An awful lot now are picking things that we wouldn't have thought of them, like financial services and how do I become an investment banker? How do I become a hedge fund manager? How do I do it? Like the one, Mario, that I must say I feel personally very bitter about myself is that when we were in our career guidance days in school, there was always the desks would be set up and there'd be somebody telling you how to join the priesthood or the Christian Brothers or the civil service or teaching or medicine. There was never one for aircraft leasing. And those guys are making out like bandits.
Yeah.
Why was there never an aircraft leasing table up and career guidance day in school? And anyway, somebody can explain it to me later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, when people hear the name John Crown, I mean, obviously the word cancer comes into their mind straight away, and what an expert you are in that field. But how did that specialisation come about, and why?
Again, I've been asked this before. I've thought about it a lot. I mean, there wasn't like a personal tragedy in our family or anything like that where I said, I know several cancer specialists whose mothers sadly died of breast cancer when they were young, and they said, damn it, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And, hats off to them. They've done a great job. A few I can think of, I won't mention their names, but, great people. I was aware as a kid growing up in the States, there was always this thing about the cure for cancer. Cancer was a big ticket item. The smoking story was coming on in a big way, and there were different stories about prominent people who died of cancer, and it was seen as being something which was a real challenge to American can-doism. This is something we have to do something about.
Go to the moon, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was, and it's funny you should mention that, because Joe Biden has sponsored a big cancer research initiative called the Moonshot, but the American Society of Clinical Oncology and the American Association for Cancer Research. But it was always, I guess, that big challenge. And I did have one friend whose father had died at a young age from cancer, and his mother, who we were very friendly with, my mother was very friendly with, subsequently died. And I had other friends who did lose their parents to it. And you know something, I knew I wanted to be a cancer specialist nearly as soon as I knew I wanted to be a doctor. I mean, I knew I was picking leaving cert subjects really at the age of 14 in preparation for medicine. And I really knew with kind of laser-focused certainty all the way through medical school. I had a brief flirtation to the idea of doing ophthalmology, which thank God I didn't do. I would have been a disaster. I wouldn't be very good at all those little fine movements with the fingers, I don't think. But I never really deviated from it. Oncology was what I wanted to do, and I still find it endlessly fascinating. And like that old other cliche, and thank God I've lived long enough to see the improvements in cancer medicine, because it is just so vastly better now than it was when I first.
And is it because it has been the Everest of kind of medicine?
I think there's no doubt that there was a bigger effort put into cancer research than into other areas. It did have the public imagination in a very strong grip, and as a result, lots of money got shaken, out of various trees to go into cancer research, and both the government have a critically important role for government-funded research, and also private charities and the private industry. In truth, there were a couple of things about cancer research we couldn't have guessed 40 years ago, which were there for the plucking once they became apparent. And the big one is immunotherapy. So as everybody knows, we all have an immune system, and our immune system is there to stop us fighting infections. It's designed by nature to recognize germs as being foreign to us, not being like us, being something which is different and something which is to be attacked to stop us getting sick. And the sense was, well, the immune system can do that, but it can't do cancer, and it can't do cancer because cancer is not a foreign invader. Cancer is us. Cancer is our own cells misbehaving. So for all of those reasons, there was a sort of, we're probably never going to get anywhere with immunotherapy or with immune-based treatments for cancer. And in fact, there was a great big discovery waiting for years to be made, and it was finally made by two wonderful gentlemen, Dr. Allison and Dr. Hanju from Japan, about 15 years ago, that the immune system actually has natural brakes built into it. They're restraints, or they're called checkpoints. And why are they there? If we didn't have those restraints, our immune system would be uncontrolled, and more people would have immune system diseases, things like ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, all these, various conditions where rheumatoid arthritis, where your own immune system becomes your enemy. And those checkpoints, which were there to protect our immune system, or to prevent our immune system from attacking our normal tissues, also protected cancer. And one of those little quirks, mistakes of nature. And they discovered that you could turn off those brakes, turn off those checkpoints. And it has had a revolutionary effect on cancer treatment, not in every cancer, but for a bunch of cancers where the treatment before was really very poor.
So is this a revolutionary?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobel Prize already won by the two gents about 8 years ago. And
in practice, it's revolutionising the treatment.
I remember about 5 years ago sitting down with a sheaf of orders I was signing for cancer treatments, and turning to the oncology nurse who was with me and said, 5 years ago, none of those drugs existed.
Yes.
It's been, so for some cancers like malignant melanoma, which is a very big item, unfortunately, we were not designed by nature to be out in the sun.
Right. Sorry, I'm ignorant. It is a skin cancer.
It's a skin cancer.
And it's from light? Or from ultraviolet light?
In the great majority of cases, it's from sun exposure. In the great majority of cases. And sadly, in some cases, from artificial UV light from tanning and things like that. So melanoma, if you had spread melanoma before, if it had spread to other parts of your body, that was sadly, in about 96% of cases, a death sentence. And now 50 to 60% of those patients are still alive 5 years later. It's been a huge change.
Yeah.
Lung cancer, the impact isn't as dramatic there, but it's been very important. Some kinds of breast cancer, some uncommon kinds of bowel cancer, a whole raft of cancers related to the urinary system, kidney cancer, bladder cancer. It's been really totally transformative for those. Some of those very, very nasty cancers that people get around their head and neck area, their throat, their tongue, their mouth, some of those can just melt away. Not always with immunotherapy. So it's been phenomenal change, I must say. It really has been.
And is it exponential, the rate of improvement at the moment? Are we going through a kind of are we going through the most golden period of cancer treatment that the world has ever seen?
That's for sure. It is absolutely a golden phase. Now, it may plateau a little bit because first the discovery was made about the checkpoints, then the discovery was made that you could drug the checkpoints, and then it was the discovery phase when lots of different studies were done in different kinds of cancer to see, will it work here, will it work here, we'll do 20 patients with this, 30 patients with that. And that phase is largely over. And I think we have a pretty good idea right now which are the cancers to which there is sensitivity to the immune therapies and the ones where there is not. But a very interesting new development is if you look at lung cancer. So if you've got widespread lung cancer, the immune treatments on top of conventional chemotherapy add an increment on average of a number of extra months to your survival, but also a minority of patients get fantastic results. Like, it just goes away. Like, I have to stress, it's still a minority, but they get a great. I mean, I have patients that we treated 5 and 6 years ago who are in continuous remission, and I hope they're cured. Okay, but the really interesting newer discovery is if you take patients with early lung cancer, okay, people that could have an operation where it hasn't yet spread, okay. In those situations, we know that if you do the operation, sometimes it works, but sadly, lots of times, the cancer will still come back. It had spread. We just can't detect the spread before the operation. The cells are too small. But what has now been worked out, and a lot of the work was done by a brilliant young Irish doctor, Patrick Ford, in Baltimore and Johns Hopkins. What he and others doing the same field of research have shown is that if you give that kind of immune therapy to someone before the operation, and then do the operation, a lot of the time the cancer is either disappeared or is dramatically reduced by the time you do the operation. But more importantly, many of those patients, they're staying in remission for longer. So that I think will be the next big push now, will be looking at that approach in some other cancers. And we're looking at it already in melanoma as well, giving it before an operation.
Extraordinary. Like, we all go through our lives, right, and we all kind of go, oh, well, my dad had a bit of a susceptibility to, blood pressure and heart and everything, so we can kind of either look that up, check it out, and, watch our lifestyle and stuff. But I suppose the nightmare for all of us is that we just go, I've been living, healthily all my life, and then suddenly I just go in and find out I have cancer. Is there anything that you can do have there been improvements made on checking to see how you are before, and even for no reason?
Well, I always say to people is, apropos of what you were saying about living a healthy life, people often become racked with guilt and think, what have I done to bring this upon myself? And the first thing to say is that it's not your fault. Cancer in most cases is just bad luck. There was a really important paper written about 10 or 12 years ago by a very famous oncologist called Vogelstein, in which he basically did a kind of a correlation between normal cells in the body, not cancer, normal cells. How fast did those cells in the course of normal life turnover change, double, multiply, die, replace, blah, 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 and ones where that doesn't happen so much. And in general, there's a correlation between that and the chance of getting cancer. So if you think that every day in your body, millions and billions of cells divide, and a really intricate, delicate mechanism, the DNA lines up, it splits in two, the cell splits in two new cells are formed. And this happens millions of times a day, and it normally works. Okay. But sometimes there's a mistake. Sometimes there's a little error. And
a mutation.
Exactly. That's exactly how a mutation arises. And most of those mutations, thankfully, that's not compatible with the cell living. The cell just dies. But sometimes the cell will survive and the mutation will survive with it. Now, in many cases, that mutation will not produce any particular deleterious effect. But we'll say if 2 or 3 years later the same cell gets another mutation, and then maybe another one, and then you can get a critical number of mutations which make that cell become a cancer cell. So that is just kind of bad luck. And that's why in general, we all know the tragic exceptions, cancer is mainly a disease with the middle-aged and elderly. As you get older, your chance of getting cancer is higher because you just accumulate more mutations as you go through.
And more chance.
Exactly.
More darts you throw at the board, the more it's going to hit the jack.
That's exactly what it is. So having said all that, What can you do? Well, obviously there are some incredibly important things not to do. The first thing is you don't smoke. Nothing is as mutagenic to your cells as tobacco smoke. The number of mutagenic chemicals in a puff of tobacco smoke is vast. So, you need to stop it. I used to smoke myself. I know it's not easy.
Did you?
Yeah.
How many?
I was a real smoker.
Yeah, proper smoker.
Yeah,
Me too.
I was a proper smoker.
Me too. I used to smoke till 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a bit longer than that, but I so I'm not. People accuse me of being a nanny state pusher.
No.
I'm not, but I mean, I hate seeing people's lives being ruined by smoking, and I will be relentless in trying to get people to stop.
Don't smoke.
So if you don't smoke, don't start. If you do smoke, stop. If you do smoke, you can use vapes if it helps you get off them. If you don't smoke, don't start vaping because it might addict you to tobacco and it might make you a smoker. So I'm quite anti-vaping, except as a partially healthcare supervised smoking cessation strategy. There is bad news about alcohol, I'm afraid.
Shit.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. As somebody once said, I'm not sure if you give up alcohol, you'll live longer, but life will seem longer.
But not red wine, John.
It's all alcohol. Red wine is not an essential food. And again, somebody is going to call and say, I saw that fellow having pints last Friday night. We all have to make our own value judgment on this, but there's no doubt.
So that's mutagenic as well.
It is. It is not as bad as smoking or anything like as bad as smoking. But the real serious epidemiologists, the people who really study patterns of disease in society, will tell you there actually isn't a safe level. If you really want to completely minimize your risk of cancer, if that's the only goal in your life is avoiding cancer, you should always give up alcohol. Yeah, but probably having a modest alcohol intake gives you a modest increase in risk. There are other things like, there was a lot of publicity a few years ago about a study which showed that if you eat red meat, your chance of getting colon cancer is 25% higher. Well, it was. Your chance went from 4% to 5%.
Okay.
25% of 4%.
Still minimal.
Yeah. So
I would have thought that. Sorry for interrupting in your gallop, but I would have thought that, like when you mentioned smoking being incredibly carcinogenic and mutagenic because of the chemicals in it, kind of the first thing I said when you said that was the American diet. The classic North American processed food diet, because I couldn't think of anything that's more filled with artificial chemicals.
Probably the biggest risk from diet isn't the quality of the food you eat, but the quantity of the food you eat. Obesity is a risk factor for all kinds of health things, including cancer. And managing your calorie intake is probably as important. There have been studies which show that processed foods are a little more likely to lead, but it's not like a great big, huge risk compared to, but there are somewhat higher risks if you have a lot of processed foods, for sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of that would be things like processed meats in particular, which are lovely to eat. But I mean, that's something to be aware of. Irish people were not designed to go out in the sun. We're designed to be sitting at home, morosely writing poetry, in dark, bog, beside the sides of bogs someplace. We're not supposed to go to the sun. And we have a catastrophically escalating incidence of skin cancers as a result of the changes in our holiday mores. We have melanoma, again, has shot up over the years.
Is that because of increased wealth and increased holidays?
Absolutely.
So that's prosperity,
exposure.
for example.
Yes.
More of us can afford more foreign holidays. More of us are in the sun more.
Yes.
More of us are exposed to it.
We also have a habit of taking in the sun very unhealthily in Ireland.
That's right.
Because we don't see it much of the time the rest of the year, we have a little tendency that when we go away...
We don't put on sun cream.
Exactly. Or we burn ourselves to bits. You're right.
Jesus.
Do
you remember the 70s? Well, I remember my mother and her aunt in the 70s when the sun would come out in Waterford, and they would put cooking oil on their bodies.
That's right.
Do you remember that, Ed?
That's right.
They put cooking oil on their bodies to get the sun.
And the little reflectors.
They put Fritex. They would put Fritex on.
Right.
Literally Fritex.
That's right, yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other great thing you see is when you go to a holiday resort on that very sad last day of holidays, and if the Irish have, we'll say, a half an hour before check-in time and they're in the airport parking lot, they're all sitting there in the airport parking lot trying to get that last bit of sun before we go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So the rule is don't make your skin change colour. By all means, go to a sun holiday. Jeez. Sit in the shade. When you walk down to the pool, by all means, slather yourself in the highest factor you can.
Yeah.
I have one of those lovely, what they call the rash shirts now, the long-sleeved shirt. I wear that when I'm swimming in the water.
And does a proper sun cream give you a good protection?
It does. It doesn't give you 100% protection. It decreases. Yeah. It increases the amount of sunlight you'd have to get the equivalent level of sun damage 50-fold if it's factor 50. That's the way it works. But there still is some. And, sit by the pool, sit under the umbrella when you go for your walk in the evening, on the boardwalk, wear a floppy, long sleeve something, cover yourself up. I know, I'm a killjoy. Sorry about that. Yeah, but
you're a killjoy morosely writing Irish poetry.
That's right.
So, I mean, I was just looking back through the people I've had on the podcast, and, so many of them have had cancer or are coming out of cancer. And that's a completely, a relatively new thing in world life, world affairs, where people are coming on to radio programs and podcasts and television and speaking openly about their cancer, what they call journey. And we speak joyfully about it. We speak funnily about it. We joke about it. I remember having, very funny conversation with Brian Kennedy, the singer, Kathy Kelly, the author, recently about, their experiences with cancer, and, she lost her hair and everything, Kathy. But because the prognosis is so positive, that now it has gone from being this death knell, and had gone from being this thing that nobody can talk about to being something that actually people openly talk about, knowing that they can deal with it. So our relationship publicly with cancer has completely changed, John.
You're right. And there have been a few reasons for that. Number one, there are more cancer survivors. And in particular, if you look at something like breast cancer, the percentage of people who will live 5 or 10 years or a normal life expectancy after breast cancer has dramatically improved. For a whole lot of reasons. I think mainly because of better drugs, but also because of better screening and better awareness. Remember me to come back to early diagnosis in a minute. You'd asked me about that. But we get into our Freudian free association there for a second, but I'll come back to it in a moment. But as well as that, more people are prepared to talk about it now. That, I think, is part of the situation as well. I think it's something that people used to hush up in the past. I'm old enough to remember in several hospitals I worked in fact, on both sides of the Atlantic, where the family would say, "Don't tell him he has cancer." And I'd say, "Well, he's in a cancer hospital. The penny, will probably drop." But so no, he doesn't know he's got cancer.
Yeah.
And people would, and sometimes the family, the relative would say to the family, the patient would say, "I don't want the family to know how bad things are." Because, patients love their families and they're trying to protect them from bad news, and the families love their patient who's affected with cancer. And so I'm a great believer in being very open about it. I mean, I always tell patients and their families that I will never lie to them. If they ask me a question, I will tell them, The whole question of how you give bad news, there isn't one right way to give bad news. I mean, everybody is different. And you do have to be sensitive to the fact that some people are telling you, "I want more news now," and some people are actually telling you, "Back off a little bit. We'll come back to this later." But honesty is the best policy.
Okay, early diagnosis you were talking about.
So we've been depending on early diagnosis for many years for physical findings on examination. If you have the old, classic since most of the last century, the American Cancer Society warning signs: if you have a lump in your breast or a lump anywhere, see a doctor. If you're bleeding from someplace you shouldn't be bleeding from, see a doctor. If you're losing weight, see a doctor, all of these things. And then we reach the stage of actually screening patients. And screening is using often relatively non-specific tests on large numbers of citizens in an attempt to reduce the death rate in that population. So if you look at something like mammography is not a good test if you've got a lump in your breast. If you go to your doctor with a lump in your breast, a normal mammogram provides no reassurance whatsoever. The lump needs to be investigated more completely than a mammogram, which, by the way, mammogram is a breast x-ray. Yeah. But if you want to look at a population of women and say, how can we have fewer of those die from breast cancer? Mammography works to an extent. If you take 100,000 women and screen them all every 2 years, over the age of 50, by the way, with mammograms, you will end up having somewhat fewer deaths of breast cancer in that group of patients. Cervix cancer is a spectacular example. The pap smear, the smear test which women have done. I mean, if a woman has actual symptoms, gynecological symptoms, you would not just go and have a pap smear, and if your pap smear is normal, say, that's fine, don't do anything else. You would have to get a proper examination with a gynecologist, possibly scans, possibly ultrasounds. But if you look at a group of women, a large population of women, and say, my God, too many are dying from cervix cancer, what can we do to reduce that? Pap smear is a wonderful test. It reduces in a screened population the mortality, depending on how well you do it, by 70, 80, 90. I mean, invasive cervix cancer around the world is a common and horrible disease. Okay. And thankfully, we still have too much of it in Ireland, but we have a whole lot less than we would have had if we didn't have.
Okay, what about me, right? Let's say as a early middle-aged man, right? What if I said, I want to check out, I want to go to the doctor, I want to go for a screening. Can that be done? But they can't, what are they looking for? They wouldn't even know.
Well, there are a few cancers for which there is well-authenticated, well-validated screening technology. Now, one of the ones that's commonly used is prostate screening with a blood test, and possibly a blood test, and also if your doctor does a finger examination on the prostate and through the bottom. That has a lot of support, and there's a move to formalize a national prostate screening program. There's been just, I'm hesitant to say this, but there's obviously, the little problem with prostate screening at the moment is there's a concern that some cancers get picked up that might not necessarily have resulted in the person's death. That prostate cancer is often a very low-key disease, especially in older men. But having said that, on balance, I would say that getting your prostate blood test checked is a very reasonable thing to do. I would certainly suggest that any man who's concerned about their health and wants to know should talk to their GP about the pluses and minuses, the pros and cons of prostate screening. There is now national screening for bowel cancer, which is based on taking a small sample of your stool, your feces, and having it checked for the presence of trace amounts of blood. In America, they recommend that people should just have a colonoscopy, but if you turn 40 or 45 years of age, you should just go for a colonoscopy. I would certainly have a very low threshold for sending my patients who've had other cancers for colonoscopy, but the national screening program at the moment here is not based on colonoscopy, it's based on the stool test. The really interesting one that's going to be very controversial, and it's relevant maybe to you and to me, is screening former smokers for lung cancer, because there are very, very solid data, really solid data now that show that doing a series of CAT scans, CT scans, on people that have more than a 20-pack year history, which really anybody who was a serious smoker into adult life will have, that you greatly reduce the chance that they will die of lung cancer if you screen them with 3 CT scans over 5 or 6 years. Now, the little problem with that is that, if you actually have a cough in Ireland and you want to get a CT scan done, the waiting time can be so bad. If you're being actually investigated for a symptom, the waiting time for a lot of these scans is unacceptably long. Okay. So we're a long way from having enough scanners to have a national screening strategy where you don't come in because you've had a cough or because you've coughed blood, because you're short of breath. You come in because you've a history of smoking 20 cigarettes a day and you're 40 years of age.
Wow.
The data for that in women is incredibly strong. The magnitude of the reduction in the chance of dying of lung cancer for current or former smoking women who go for screening is very high. So when I was in the Senate, I was a great believer in why don't we have what the tax professionals call hypothecated tax, which is where you take a tax and you designate it for a specific purpose. You say this tax will be used for cancer and heart disease prevention. It'll be used for screening. We'll put that tax on cigarettes, put an extra euro in a pack of cigarettes and say, that's the money we're going to use to have a national screening program for lung cancer and for similarly for good works in the area of cardiovascular disease as well. But that went down like a lead balloon. But we could do it and we will need to look at it. But I'm sorry now, I don't want to take over here completely. But the really interesting thing that's going on right now is blood test screening. There is a huge interest right now in new technologies which allow the detection of small amounts of DNA in the bloodstream that might have been shed by cancer cells into the bloodstream. Now, this gives the potential to diagnose at incredibly earlier stages compared to we'll say looking for a couple of millimeters of an abnormality on a chest X-ray or a mammogram or a CT scan, and my money is on that one. I think that field is going to really take off. I think it will really become very standard. There are already a number of commercial tests. I know you can pay for them a number of thousands and get the screening test done. At the moment, a little bit of non-specificity about them. If you get one abnormal, there's a bit of head scratching. What do we do next? You then obviously put the person through a series of scans to see if you can localize where the cancer cell came from, and maybe you won't find anything. So then when do you repeat the scans? How often do you do them? How much radiation do you expose people to?
Just a quick note on that. I mean, imagine being a person of certain means and you decided, I'm going to use, what is it? It's going to cost me a certain amount of thousands of quid, right? And I'm going to get loads of different screenings. And some of the screenings turn up abnormalities. And then you get sent into this spiral of tests which lasts for the next 5 years. And you're then, in this kind of spiral of worry, you know?
That is the central conundrum of screening healthy populations. I mean, that is always the issue with screening healthy populations, that you will get false positives, you'll get false negatives. The false negatives, obviously, people can be very distressed if they've had a screening test and they're subsequently diagnosed with a cancer which didn't show. And we've had, as you know, all kinds of national issues about that. People didn't really quite understand, I think, what that whole thing was about. This is screening. This is not a diagnostic test. There is a built-in error rate in these screens. The screening tests are good, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a broken record here. They're good for reducing the number of people who will die. They're not necessarily a good test for you. That's the issue. But the false positives are a problem too, because lots of people will end up having biopsies, operations, anesthetics and things for something which thankfully nothing turns out of it.
John, talk to me about patients. What is it like to deal with patients with advanced cancer?
Well, Mario, it's simply the most extraordinary privilege that people invite you into their lives, into the lives of their families at this frequently awful time in their life. And sometimes it's very gratifying when you can give them hope, when you can give them a good result, when, sometimes you cure them. I mean, that's the great thing nowadays. We are seeing people that are getting results we would have only dreamed of before. But sadly, often that's not the case. And you're dealing with people throughout the long trajectory of an illness. You often have met them, they've first been diagnosed with cancer. Then they've just had the worst news of their life, and then you may have to give them further news if the cancer comes back for the first time, and then you take them through treatment and through side effects, and you see the ravages on a daily basis that it can cause to people's lives, and you're just impressed by the extraordinary level of courage that you see. People who just very often just get on with life and do their best, and also the great support that people get from their families. So. To me, I'm always conscious, I'm capable of being quite abstract about cancer and thinking about this gene or that drug or that trial or this combination or whatever. But it's important to never lose sight of the actual person that's at the center, both of the research, the practice, the advances that have occurred. And it's great to know that we so many more times now we're giving good news rather than bad news compared to the ratio of good news to bad news we would have given a number of years ago. And my hat's off to all the fabulous people who really fight this disease every day. Like, I go home at nighttime, close the door behind me. They go home at nighttime, it's still with them. The way that they deal with it, the way that their families deal with it. It's just very inspiring. Yeah,
actually, just now that you say that, I mean, when you look around the world in your everyday life and the trivialities that we kind of get obsessed with, and in many respects, the weakness that we as humans show on a daily basis, the narcissism, the vanity, the venal, greed, soft skin, thin skin. And then on the other hand, humans can be faced with this, what can we call an Everest of a challenge. And then from nowhere, it seems, can produce this incredible adaptability, courage, bravery, which maybe you wouldn't even associate with those people.
Sure.
Aren't humans incredible?
They are, but I'll tell you one other thing that has struck me recently, apropos of what you're saying, is when you think of the huge effort we make into getting people living a few months longer or a few years longer or increasing the outcome by 1% or 10% or 20%, and then turn on the news at night time and see the vast amount of effort that's going into people slaughtering one another right now. And I grew up in New York, as we were saying, in the 1960s, and the other big thing that hung over everybody's head in the 1960s was the prospect of nuclear war. And I've never been as terrified of the international situation as I am right now. I think there are some really awful flashpoints, and I think you sit in the back of a lecture theatre at the American Association for Cancer Research or the European Association, the European Oncology meeting, and you think, my God, how do they do that? Some incredible advances. People are talking about some little tweak of one molecule that can barely be detected and how they can now manipulate it. And I'm thinking, we could all be back in the Stone Age. But we really could be. This could all just end in a flash, in a blinding flash. We could all be back, scrambling around, hard scrabble living, foraging for food, the few survivors that would be left. And the greatest absolute priority for all of us in the world right now must be trying to really get the message of peace home. it's very terrifying right now. It really is. To think that people would do what they do for the sake of the colour of a flag. We have a lot of experience of that in Ireland, trust me, but on a much bigger scale in the world, the things people will do for it.
Yeah, that is an amazing juxtaposition, that the incredible achievement of man to change a molecule to transform the world, and yet to just bomb each other into the Stone Age. On the other hand, the duality of man.
Yeah.
You talked about being in the Senate a minute ago, and you were in the Senate for about 5 years, wasn't it?
I was in 1 5-year term,
Yeah, independent senator. And of course, we were used to hearing you on the radio a lot as well. And one of the things
they tell me I have a face for radio.
No, you do not.
Yeah,
and one of the things you were well known for was basically your kind of frank, candid tone, especially about the health service. And especially with your American accent as well. It sounded like, in a way, you weren't this sort of... In a way, you were kind of not the normal Irish voice giving out about it. You were kind of a voice almost from the outside, a kind of a hard-ass, let's just call it the way it is, American voice, basically telling us our health, all these the home truths about the health system. Now, the health system is one of these things that you almost get inured to hearing about or listening to on the radio and on the television. And sometimes you know, as a listener, you can turn off because, like a lot of debates that happen, a lot is already presumed about how much the listener already knows, and therefore immediately when somebody starts arguing about it, it goes into an area that is just too fluffy and too kind of knotty to get into. So if you were speaking to me like a 2-year-old, which I'm afraid you're going to have to, John, what essentially are the key problems, as you see it, with our health service that we are giving out about the whole time?
Well, I historically used to give a speech which was in fact plagiarised a few times, in which I said the 3 core problems were inequality, inefficiency, and generally mediocre quality. So the inefficiency is still a big problem. The inequality is still a big problem. The quality has improved. There is no doubt that the health service is better than it was. It is better than it was. It was very poor. And I used to get upset when people would say things like it's a third world. It's not. I've seen third world health systems up close. We never had a third world health system.
We never had a third world.
No, we had a first world health system, which was, despite having a disproportionately really well qualified cohort of professionals, medicine and nursing, and the other specialties, physiotherapy, etc., the product they were delivering was not good because the system was not set up to give them the maximum opportunity to do it right and to do it efficiently and to a sufficiently high quality. And the 2 big practical things that you'd say, well, how does this affect me and the patient? Well, number one was you were waiting catastrophically long for things to happen. I mean, the scale of the waiting times in Ireland was just off the charts compared to other countries in Western Europe. And I'm not comparing it to America or other totally private systems. I'm comparing it to the other pure social democracy-based health systems of Western Europe. Ours was really awful. It still is.
That would be compared to France and Germany, which would be awful, yeah.
The only thing that made ours look okay was the fact that the second worst tended to be the British. And we tend to compare ourselves to the British in everything. And they were close to the bottom of the charts for most of those things as well.
But I think they're deteriorating now badly as well.
Yes, and the second, other than waiting times, the other thing which I think was a huge problem, which has changed, was the likelihood that the care that you would be given was being delivered by a fully trained professional as opposed to by a trainee doctor. That was a huge problem in the Irish system, and that is, I think, much less of a problem now than it was. When I came back to Ireland, I was the 4th oncologist in the country. I used to joke that I was often in the elevator in the cancer hospital I worked in New York with more Irish oncologists than there were in Ireland. I was certainly very often, much more often in Eamon Doran's bar in New York with more Irish oncologists than there were in Ireland at the time. There are now, some are about 60. And that kind of multiplier has occurred across most of the medical specialties. So situations like we would have had in our hospital traditionally 2 cardiologists, we have about 12 now. It has improved very, very dramatically. There's no doubt about that. And that does mean that the care you get is much more likely to be given by a fully trained professional senior person now than was the case before. You'll still be waiting too long for it though. And the inefficiency, I think, is there for all to see. I think the system is laden with bureaucracy. I think, the way the system is reimbursed incentivizes inefficiency. It doesn't incentivize getting people off waiting lists, because if you take a public hospital and say, this is your budget on January 1st, make it last until New Year's Eve, there will be no more money. That's all you're getting. So if the demand for your services goes up, the natural thing to do is to make people wait for it, because patients on waiting lists are free. They're not a cost centre for the hospital. Patients who are waiting for care are not costing the hospital anything, and that's the key reason why we have it. I wish I could take credit for this, but I can't. Somebody once put it beautifully, where he said, imagine there's a bar, and there's a public bar, and there's a lounge. And in the lounge, the bar staff are paid by the drink they serve, but in the bar, they're paid by the hour. Where will you get your drink faster?
By the drink.
Yeah, and it's a little bit like that. I mean, the private system in Ireland, the reimbursement is linked to activity. So you don't, in general, though you do sometimes, you don't have to wait as much for private care in Ireland as you do for public care. And there isn't, and the trouble is, of course, and I hate to say this, but all the people who run the public service have private insurance. They don't use it, with few exceptions. Like the politicians, the senior civil servants, the hospital managers, the doctors, all of these people have private insurance themselves. So it's like two separate systems. And that's why I'm not a big fan of Schlontacare, because I think Schlontacare will, I think, cement the differences between the two systems. And look, you know what, I'm well capable of boring you and your producer to tears talking about health economics for the next while, but there's a different way of doing it. But maybe I won't go into it in full detail now, but there's a model for health delivery which I think is better. It's more like the German model. In the German model, everybody must have insurance. If you're poor, you don't pay as much as the guy who's rich. Rich pay more.
That's what I was going to ask you. That's what I was going to ask you. Is there a model that
Yes.
Yeah, and that's
German.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good system. Very good system.
Yeah. Predictable.
Yeah. I mean, the Germans have, and the really interesting thing about the German system.
Michael G. Higgins would say the Cuban system, of course.
What do you say to those people who would look upon, let's say, because you often hear that about Cuba, right? I mean, you hear, the kind of communist, totalitarian setup, surveillance and all that sort of stuff. But then they say, but, the magnificent health system. Do you know about that?
I think by the standards of other poor countries, Cuba's health system is very good, but I don't think it's a system that either you or I or a British, American or German or Canadian person would be happy to use, to be honest with you. But there's no doubt the Cubans have a system for its peer countries with its level of poverty that is better than most of them, yeah.
What about America, John? I mean, where you've spent so much time in. I mean, there is that cliche that, like, you get your leg hacked off on the side of the street and then you go into the hotel, to the hospital, and they're there. What's your Visa card? Oh, sorry, can't help you. I mean, is it that cut and thrust? Is it that ruthless? Is it that
the largest socialized health system in the world is the US Medicare system. It is the largest socialized health system in the world.
But
it's not comprehensive. So about 15% of American people fall into a real shortfall in terms of not having insurance coverage. For them, there is state and federally government funded programs to deliver free healthcare, usually called Medicaid as opposed to Medicare. And but you have to be bankrupt. You really have to. You have to. If you've got money, they will expect you before you can get Medicaid. If you've got means, they will test you before you're able to get all of that care for free. So it is a bad system. There's no part of me is recommending the American system for Ireland. I think if you have decent insurance in America, you will get superlative medical care. The American system is also very inefficient in some ways. There's a huge amount of reduplication in terms of billing, insurance companies, multiple insurance companies billing. And there's no doubt about it, the incentive to do things in return for money, I think, is too great in the States. It's well known, and it may be a cliche, and it probably isn't as much of a case in cancer, where we're much more driven by data. But one certainly does get the impression that there are a lot of people operating, very private facilities where turnover is everything. The Canadian health system is very good. The Canadian health system is actually very like the VHI system here. We think of the VHI system here as being private. I mean, I don't know how you can call it private insurance. It's owned by the government. It's got community rating. It has got one shareholder who's the Minister for Health, and any money it makes gets ploughed back into the service it provides for its members. It's public. It's another kind of public insurance. It's one that people opt into and have to pay more to get. But that's rather like the system in Canada, and not a million miles separate from the German system as it applies to hospital care. So in my ideal world, we would have something like VHI, probably 2 or 3 versions of VHI competing with one another, all not-for-profit, all basically you can elect to join which one you want to join. And when you join it, you then have really uniform care. Now, there may be differences in terms of the hotel accommodation aspect of your healthcare. You may pay more to go to a place which will give you a single room as opposed to being in a twin room or something like that. But in general, it would be a much more equalising effect than Schlontacare. Schlontacare is 2-tier care.
Right. John, what a fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for schooling me and for meeting you. I'd never met you before.
Thank you.
And great to meet you.
Whereas I feel like we're old friends. As I said, I mean, one of the greatest risks I would have had, I must say, was having an embarrassing personal accident when I used to listen to the Gift Grub video in my car. I would be reduced to paroxysms at times. I think I didn't know which one I liked the most. You're one of Michael D. Higgins and the airport security.
Oh, Naked Camera.
That was very good. And
I'm not taking my underpants off.
That's right. Absolutely. And Jose Mourinho was right up there too, I must say. Yeah.
Are you a football fan?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
were you a Chelsea fan?
Oh, no.
Liverpool, tell me.
Heartbreak today. Heartbreak, Mario. I'm a Leeds fan.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Matt Cooper's a Leeds fan as well. My God, it's been a disastrous 24 hours.
It is.
John Crown, thank you very much.
It's a great preparation for a career in medicine, high expectation and crushing disappointment, I must say. Anyway.
John, the other thing was I want to thank you not only for coming in, but taking such good care of my very, very good friend, Tony Fenton.
Lord rest him, a lovely man, brave man.
And an incredibly positive individual.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he had nothing but good things to say about you. And it's great to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
And that's it from me for this week. My thanks, of course, to John Crown for giving me a fascinating insight into his unique life. Thanks to all of you for listening. Remember, tell one other person about this podcast if you can. That's all I ask. You can get in touch with me directly, mariorosenstock@gmail.com. More and more of you are, by the way. And I'm getting back to more and more of them as well. And I do read them all. If you want to see me live, remember, I'm in the 3 Arena next year, Friday, 28th of March, 2025. See you same time, same place.